Hello everyone and welcome to the video. I'm Professor Amanda and class has officially begun. So who's ready for some Nightfall deep dives? To kick it off, we're going to do some of the easiest teams to cover. We're going to call them the tap-tap teams.
How about a little percussion? Tap, tap, tappy, tap, tap, tappy, tap, tap, tappy.
Tap, tap, tappy. And these guys are mostly going to revolve around our charmers, which are Alolan Ninetales and Wigglytuff, and then the grass razor leafers, so Venusaur and Shadow Gloom and Shadow Victory Bell. So let's jump into the charmers. So in general, Alolan Ninetales can beat Wigglytuff, except if the Wigglytuff has really good IVs, in which case the Wigglytuff can just shield and farm down the Alolan Ninetales and not even have to throw a charge move. In most case scenarios, however, the Alolan Ninetales will be the one that knocks out the Wigglytuff. So besides Charmers versus Charmers, if we move into the other types, Charmers versus Ice, Alolan Ninetales is going to beat all of the Ice types in every shield scenario. The only exception maybe being if the Lapras has really good IVs, it can take out the Ninetales. But in most cases, that's not going to happen. With Wigglytuff, it's a little more difficult. So Wigglytuff can farm all of the Ice types down in a 2-shield scenario without throwing any of its charge moves. It can even farm down Frostlass in the 1-shield scenario, but it's left with very little HP, so it depends how you want to play that. Do you want to 2-shield and have a lot of energy and a lot of health for the next Pokemon, or do you want to have just a little bit left so they can't farm you very much and you can throw on to the next opponent? It's up to you. Lapras is a little more tricky. Lapras, you will lose the 1-shield, but if the Lapras throws straight Surfs, then your Wigglytuff will win. And it's a similar scenario with Articuno. So if Articuno goes straight Icy Winds, the Wigglytuff will still beat it in the 1-shield scenario. The Charmers versus the counter users is even more straightforward, and as it probably should be, all of the counter users will lose to all of the Charmers, with the exception of Blaziken against the Alolan Ninetales. Blaziken can win in the 0-shield scenario, and that's just because it has a fire charge move and Alolan Ninetales can't handle that very well. But in most cases, the Charmer will farm down the counter user fairly quickly. Something to point out, however, if you're a Medicham user and you have best buddied it and it is above level 40, the Medicham in the 0-shield scenario can simultaneously KO with the Alolan Ninetales. It still has to throw a move, but the bulk will allow it to survive a little bit longer. Okay, the Charmers versus the Flyers is where it gets a little bit more tricky and a little more interesting, so get out your pen and paper, you might want to take some notes. So against the Charmers, Golbat is a definite win. The other ones, it's a little different. So Alolan Ninetales against Noctowl. Noctowl will win in the 0-shield scenario. They will simultaneously knock each other out in the 1-shield scenario, and the Alolan Ninetales can take the 2-shield scenario. So Alolan Ninetales will win to Shadow Gligar in all shielding scenarios if the Gligar is running Aerial Ace. A fun little twist, the Alolan Ninetales will lose to a regular Gligar if it is running Dig, and that is only in the 1-shield scenario. And of course, with the bigger daddy, Alolan Ninetales will lose in the 0 and 1-shield scenario because of the Earthquake. So 0-shield scenario, the Gliscor has to land the Earthquake, and in the 1-shield, it can bait, or it can run it, and it depends if the Ninetales can call the bait correctly. So against the Wigglytuff, the Noctowl will win the 0-shield scenario, and it will also normally win the 1-shield scenario. The exception being if your Wigglytuff is attack weighted, then it can get to its charge move first and then can win the 1-shield, and it can also win the 2-shield scenario. When it comes to Wigglytuff and Gligar, it really depends on the Gligar's charge moves. So if the Gligar is running Aerial Ace, it will beat the Wigglytuff in the 0-shield scenario, but it will lose in the 1 and 2, no matter if it is the regular or the Shadow variant. If the Gligar is running Dig, it will lose in the 0 and 2-shield scenario, but it will win the 1. For Gliscor, it's the same as with the Alolan Ninetales, where it will win the 0-shield scenario, and it will win the 1-shield scenario if it can land the Earthquake. Now we'll see who can tap the best. We have the Charmers versus the Grass users. This is fairly straightforward matchup for the grass. They're going to take the Charmers out fairly easily. The only exception being Alolan Ninetales can beat the Gloom in the Zero Shield scenario, and that's just because Alolan Ninetales can reach its charge move before Gloom can do anything else. In all other cases, the Razor Leafers can pretty much two-shield and just farm down either the Wigglytuff or the Alolan Ninetales. So now we have the Charmers versus those Mud Boys. Well, the Charmers can just double shield and farm down the Mud Boys without having to throw any charge moves. But in the 0 and 1 shield scenario, Swampert will beat Alolan Ninetales. It doesn't matter if it's running Sludge Wave or Earthquake. As for Wigglytuff versus Swampert, Swampert can only win in the 0 shield scenario if it's carrying Earthquake, and it can win in the 0 and 1 shield scenario if it has Sludge Wave as the charge move. Against the Whiscash, in the 0 shield scenario, the Whiscash will win if it lands the Blizzard and then goes Mud Bomb. So now we have the miscellaneous group, which are Pokemon that didn't really fit in well to other categories. So we have Gallade, Shadow Gallade, which they have a lot of different matchups in this, so we thought it was worth separating those two, and then also Galarian Stunfisk. Fortunately for this round, Charmers versus this miscellaneous group, it's really straightforward. The Gallades don't really stand a chance against the Charmers. However, close combat does do a lot of damage, and Stunfisk will beat the Charmers because Charm is resistant against its steel typing. So let's move on to the grass and the grass holes. So Venusaur, King Grass here, beating the Razor Leafers rather easily. The only exceptions being if the Gloom is a Shadow Gloom, it can win the 2 shields if it chooses to block twice, and Victory Bell cannot do that, but Shadow Victory Bell can take Shadow Gloom in the 1 shield scenario. Against the Ice type, well, Venusaur versus Lapras, we've seen it in Catacombs Cup, we've seen it in other things. It's a very playable matchup. It really depends on IVs, it depends on how you like to store your energy, if the Lapras is going to bait you or land the Skull Bash. So we'll have a little bit of practice if you are one of these users to see how you like to play it out. Against the Razor Leafers, they're going to beat Lapras, they're going to lose to Articuno, and they can beat both Frostlass and Snowy Castform in the 2 shield scenario simply by farming them down with Razor Leaf. The grass versus the counter users is fairly interesting. Medicham, being that little Swiss Army knife type Pokemon that he is, it really depends on the moveset that it's running, how it will do versus the grass. So if it's running Dynamic Punch and Ice Punch, it will lose to Venusaur in all shielding scenarios. However, if it's running Ice Punch and Psychic, it will win the 0 and 1 shield scenario. And if it's a Best Buddy Medicham that's above level 40, it can win the 1 shield going straight Psychic. There's no need to bait with an Ice Punch. Venusaur against Shadow Machamp, well, the Shadow Machamp will lose in the 0 shield. It will win in the 1 shield scenario if it can land its Rock Throw, and it can win in the 2 shield scenario going straight Cross Chop because Shadow Machamp is just broken and stupid strong. Very funny, even though Blaziken is a fire and fighting type, it will lose to Venusaur in the 2 shield scenario because the counters aren't doing much damage to the Venusaur and it's able to block the fire moves, which are super effective. So we're going to lump the Razor Leafers together here for a minute, and we'll just say that both Shadow Gloom and Shadow Victory Bell can take out Medicham. If Medicham is running Dynamic Punch and Ice Punch, that's in all shielding scenarios. But if Medicham is running Ice Punch and Psychic, it will win the 0 and 1 shield scenarios. Shadow Gloom will lose to Shadow Machamp in a 0 shield scenario, and Blaziken will beat the Razor Leafers in the 0 and 1 shield scenario, but can lose to a 2 shield farm down. Okay, now we have the grass versus the flyers, which isn't as straightforward as you'd think it would be, and mostly because 2 of the flyers are kind of not fulfilling completely flyer roles. So it's quite obvious that all the grass are going to lose to Noctowl and Golbat in all shielding scenarios. But what gets a little bit different is when it comes to Gligar because of the different move sets that Gligar has. If the Gligar is running Aerial Ace, it can beat the Venusaur in all shielding scenarios. If the Gligar is running Dig, however, in the 1 shield scenario, the 2 of them will simultaneously KO. With Gliscor in the 1 shield scenario against Venusaur, the Venusaur can actually take it out, going straight Frenzy Plant, which shouldn't be able to happen. Even more funny, the Razor Leafers can take out Gligar and Gliscor in a 2-shield scenario, simply Razor Leafing them down so a flyer can be taken down by a grass move, just proving how stupid strong Razor Leaf is. And now we're going to move into some Shadow and IV dependent matchups. So regular Gloom beats regular Gligar in the 1-shield scenario. If the Gligar is running Dig, if it's Aerial Ace, then the Gligar will win. Gliscor will beat Gloom in a 0-shield scenario, going Earthquake, and it will simultaneously KO with the Gloom in the 1-shield scenario, no matter if it is the Shadow or the regular Gloom variant. And both Victory Bell and Shadow Victory Bell can beat a regular Gligar in a 0-shield scenario if the Gligar is running Night Slash and Dig. So those are the more than they should be complicated Flyers versus Grass matchups. So let's move on to something that is really easy to remember. That's the Grass versus the Mud Boys. Obviously, the Mud Boys are just going to completely get annihilated by the Grass and in even less time by the Razor Leafers. So we won't even spend any time on this slide, and we will move on to the next one, which is going to be our miscellaneous. So the miscellaneous are not as straightforward as we hope they would be. Venusaur can take out the Gallades in the 0-shield scenario going straight Frenzy Plant. The confusions really chunk away, but Gallade is a really glassy Pokemon. The Venusaur can also beat the Galarian Stunfisk in the 0-shield going straight Frenzy Plant, but all the other matches are bait dependent and whether or not the Stunfisk can land the Earthquake. It's rather, it could go either way. Against the Razor Leafers, the Galarian Stunfisk unfortunately will lose the 2-shield and they can just straight farm you down. And then this is also where it gets a little bit tricky with the Gallades. So both Gloom and Shadow Gloom will lose to Gallades in the 0-shield scenario. And in the 1-shield scenario, if they block the incoming Leaf Blade, they will simultaneously KO with the Gallade. In most case scenarios, the Shadow Victory Bell will simultaneously KO with a regular Gallade, unless the regular rank 1 or very close to, in which case it will survive with just enough HP to do something to the next mon that is coming in. Unfortunately, with Shadow Gallade, that is not possible because it's just too strong against the Shadow Victory Bell and it will KO. So those are your Tap team matchups. I hope that you enjoyed this deep dive. We're going to have 2 more coming out this week with the different typings that you will also be seeing in the Nightfall Cup. So please go ahead and leave a like. And if you aren't subscribed to the channel already, what's holding you back? Do it right now, and we'll catch you in the next one.